She decided to clean out her husband's office 3 months after his death, but when she opened the closet, she found a secret that took her breath away. The grief had its own scent. It was a blend of dust settling on untouched furniture, the faint trace of cologne from someone no longer walking through the house, and the stale air of a room left closed for too long. For Sarah, it was the smell of Daniel's home office. 3 months. 94 days to be precise, since her world split into a before and an after. Before, there was Daniel's laughter echoing down the hallway, the steady sound of his footsteps on the hardwood floor, the warmth of his presence beside her in bed. After, there was only silence. A heavy, dense silence that seemed to swallow all the colors and sounds of their home in Portland, Oregon. The decision to finally open that door wasn't born of courage, but of sheer necessity. Life, with its relentless persistence, demanded things. Bills to pay, documents to sort, a future to be minimally planned. Daniel's office was the epicenter of that bureaucratic chaos. He had always been the man of papers, spreadsheets, and meticulous organization. Sarah, on the other hand, was the woman of emotions, of art, of creative chaos. They were the perfect counterpoint to each other. Or so she thought. With a sigh that carried the weight of weeks of inertia, she turned the cold doorknob. The air that greeted her was the same he had last breathed in that room, frozen in time. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the blinds, cast golden stripes across the oak desk, the empty leather chair, the bookshelf crammed with law journals and technical manuals she'd never cared to read. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. A pen rested beside a notepad, as if he'd just stepped out for coffee and would be back any moment. The illusion was as painful as it was comforting. Sarah started with the easiest task, the desk drawers, contracts, insurance policies, bank statements. Each paper was a small ghost of the man he'd been, the provider, the dedicated professional. She stacked them into cardboard boxes, labeling them with a trembling hand. Taxes, life insurance, mortgage. It was mechanical, numbing work. It kept her hands busy while her mind desperately tried not to think, not to feel. But grief is treacherous. It hides in the details. As she emptied the last drawer, her fingers brushed a small metal keychain shaped like a rocket, a gift from their daughter Emily when she was 7. The memory hit her like a wave. Daniel laughing, attaching the keychain to his keys and saying, "So I'll always remember to come back to you both." Tears came without warning, hot and silent. She let herself cry for a few minutes, face buried in her hands, her body shaking with a pain that seemed endless. After pulling herself together, she stood and surveyed the room. The closet remained. A tall, dark walnut closet built into the hallway leading to the office. It was where Daniel kept what he called his dead files, old stuff, finished projects, papers that might someday be needed, but probably never would be. It was the last bastion of his organization, the least likely place to find anything of value. The doors creaked as they opened, revealing shelves packed with identical dull cardboard archive boxes. Sarah pulled out the first, then the second. Invoices from a home renovation a decade ago, manuals for appliances long since replaced. It was a graveyard of trivialities. She was about to close the doors and leave the rest for another day, maybe another year, when something caught her eye. Tucked at the back of the top shelf, almost hidden behind a stack of folders, was a different box, smaller, made of sturdier cardboard, with no label. Curious, she climbed onto a stool to reach it. The box was surprisingly light. When she set it on the floor, the dust on its lid made her cough. She opened it without expectation. Inside, more of the same. Yellowed papers, old receipts, a calendar from 2012. She sifted through the contents with one finger, feeling a pang of disappointment. For a foolish moment, part of her had hoped to find a forgotten love letter, an old photo of the two of them she didn't know existed. Something to reconnect her to the man she loved, not the bureaucrat. As she was about to close the lid, her fingers brushed something small and hard beneath a loose sheet of paper. She pushed the paper aside and saw it, a USB drive, a simple black plastic model like countless others she'd seen. But this one was different. Stuck to its surface was a small white price tag sticker, and on it, in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting, a handwriting she'd recognize anywhere, was a single word: essential. Sarah stared at the object in her hand. Essential. What kind of dead file was considered essential? And why was it hidden here in the back of a forgotten box in the most ignored closet in the house? Daniel was a tech-savvy man, but he used the cloud for everything important. USB drives, to him, were disposable transport tools. He'd never store something essential on a device so fragile and outdated, unless the contents weren't meant to be in the cloud, unless they weren't meant to be found. A chill ran down her spine, a strange sensation that wasn't grief or longing. It was something new, sharp, a premonition. Her heart began to race, a dull thud in the quiet hallway. The USB drive in her hand felt like it weighed a ton. The word essential, written in now faded blue ink, seemed to mock her. Essential to whom? Essential why? She stood, her body rigid, and walked back to the office desk. The sun was setting, and the light filtering through the window was now orange, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. She sat in Daniel's chair and stared at his closed laptop on the desk. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe. That small piece of black plastic in her hand was no longer just a storage device. It was a door to a room in her husband's life she never knew existed. And she knew with a certainty that chilled her soul that opening that door might shatter the image of the man she'd loved for 25 years forever. The first clue that grief was only the beginning of her journey had just materialized in her hand. With a movement that took all her willpower, she reached out and opened Daniel's laptop. The screen lit up, displaying the wallpaper he'd chosen. A photo of the three of them, Daniel, Sarah, and Emily, smiling on a beach in Cannon Beach years ago. The sun, the ocean, the happiness etched on their faces. That smiling man, with his arm around her, had hidden an essential secret on a USB drive. Who was he really? Her fingers trembled so much she mistyped the password twice. On the third try, the familiar desktop appeared, its icons neatly arranged in rows. She plugged in the USB drive. The sound of the system recognizing the device was unnaturally loud in the office's silence. A double click on the drive's icon revealed a single folder. It had no name, just a generic symbol. Sarah's heart pounded against her ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape. She took a deep breath, the air scraping her lungs like ground glass, and opened the folder. The contents spilled across the screen, a constellation of digital files that immediately began rewriting 25 years of her life. There were subfolders named by years: 2015, 2016, 2017, up to the most recent 2024. And within each, a devastating mosaic of a life that wasn't hers. Photos, scanned documents, text files that looked like letters or journals. The click of the mouse was the sound of hammer strikes on nails in a coffin she didn't know was being built. She opened the 2018 folder at random. The first photo that loaded was of a woman she'd never seen, with dark hair and a shy smile, sitting on a park bench. Beside her was a little girl, maybe 2 or 3 years old, with curly brown hair and big, curious eyes. The girl held a strawberry ice cream cone, her mouth smeared with it. It was a mundane, sweet scene. But then Sarah looked closer at the child's face, and the air left her. It was like looking at a photo of Daniel as a child. The same jawline, the same curve of the eyebrows, the same spark in the eyes. The recognition was so instant and painful, it left her physically breathless, as if she'd been punched in the gut. With trembling hands, she opened more files, one by one, driven by a hypnotic horror. There were dozens of photos. The girl, labeled Sophie in the file names, growing year by year. At a playground, at a birthday party with a cartoon-themed cake, dressed for a school talent show. In many of the photos, the woman with the shy smile, Rachel, was there. Daniel didn't appear in any of them, but his presence was a ghost in every image. He was the photographer. He was there, living it. Then came the letters. Not passionate love letters full of feverish promises. They were worse, far more intimate and methodical. They were emails saved as documents, addressed to Rachel. In them, Daniel asked about Sophie's cough, if the new asthma medication was working. He commented on her report card, praising her science grades. He arranged payments for rent, school, health insurance. They were the communications of a father, A present, caring, consistent father. A father he was to Emily too, but in a parallel, secret universe. "Dear Rachel," one email began, "the money for school supplies should be in your account. I saw the photo you sent of her drawing. Tell our little artist her dad's so proud. Watch out for the cold snap this week. Don't forget her jacket. With care, D. Our little artist. Her dad." The words leapt from the screen and stabbed her. Each sentence was irrefutable proof of a betrayal that wasn't just physical, a fleeting mistake. It was a betrayal of life. Daniel hadn't just had an affair. He'd built another family. A family kept in the shadows, discreetly funded, meticulously documented on that hidden USB drive. His famous organization, his methodology wasn't just for work or their life. It was for managing his secret. Sarah felt a wave of nausea. She stood abruptly, the chair rolling back and hitting the bookshelf, and ran to the hallway bathroom. She gripped the cold sink, gasping, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The face staring back was a stranger's. A 53-year-old woman with new lines carved by grief, and now by the deepest of humiliations. Who was she? The wife? The official one? The deceived? All her memories, every moment she held sacred, were now tainted. The anniversary dinner when he seemed distracted, the trip he cancelled at the last minute due to a work emergency, the late nights he blamed on endless meetings. Everything took on a new, sordid meaning. She returned to the office, feeling hollowed out. The anger hadn't arrived yet. For now, there was only a cold shock, a pain so vast it seemed too big for her body. She kept clicking, reading, looking. She found bank transfer receipts, a lease agreement for a small apartment in a neighborhood she barely knew, in Beaverton, just outside Portland. She even found a copy of Sophie's birth certificate. Father's name, blank. A legal detail that was both a protection and the cruelest of denials. He acknowledged her in secret, but denied her to the world. The pain was multifaceted. There was the pain of betrayal, the shattering of trust that was the foundation of their marriage. But there was also a strange, almost envious pain as she read his concern for the girl's asthma, her studies. It was the Daniel she knew, the caring, protective man. But he was applying that care to an entire life she'd been excluded from. She wasn't just the betrayed wife. She was the outsider, the ignorant one, the only one who didn't know. And what did that say about her? That she was so blind, so easy to deceive. The sound of a key in the front door jolted her. Emily. Sarah's heart leapt with panic. She quickly closed all the windows on the computer screen, minimizing the damning folder, and ejected the USB drive, clutching it tightly in her fist. It was too late. Emily was already at the office door, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her teenage face marked by a scowl. "What are you doing?" Emily's voice was sharp, accusatory. She looked at the mess, the cardboard boxes, her mother's pale face in her father's chair. I was just starting to organize his stuff, honey. The papers," Sarah stammered, her voice weak, unrecognizable to herself. "Organize?" Emily spat the word like an insult. "You mean dig through everything? Tear it all apart? He's barely gone, Mum. Can't you just wait a little? Leave his stuff alone?" "Emily, it's necessary. There are bills, documents." "No, it's not." Emily took a step into the room, her eyes glinting with furious tears. "You can't stand looking at his things anymore, is that it? You want to erase him as fast as you can. That's not true. You know it's not." The injustice of the accusation, combined with the storm of emotions consuming her, made Sarah's voice rise. "I loved your father." "Loved? Then why are you desecrating his memory?" Emily gestured at the chair, the desk. This was his place, his sanctuary, and you're here rummaging through it like it's trash. Are you going to throw it all away, Mum? Each word was a stab, but Sarah couldn't defend herself. How could she explain what she'd found? How could she tell this girl, already grieving the loss of her hero, that her father wasn't who she thought? The revelation would destroy her, and in that moment, Sarah realized the perfect trap Daniel had left behind. By hiding his secret, he hadn't just protected himself. He'd imprisoned her. If she told, she'd destroy her daughter. If she didn't, she'd be consumed by the truth alone. She shook her head, unable to form a response. The USB drive in her hand burned. It was the secret, the proof, the weapon that could destroy everything. And Emily, mistaking her mother's silence for guilt, not shock, took it the worst possible way. "I don't believe you," she said, her voice thick with pain and anger. "I'm going to Grandma's. At least they respect Dad there." And with that, she turned and slammed the door, leaving Sarah alone in the darkening office amid the wreckage of two lives, the one she thought she had and the one she'd just discovered. In the days following Emily's departure to her grandparents' house, the house sank into a new kind of silence. It was no longer the reverent silence of grief, but a hostile one, charged with resentment and unspoken words. Sarah moved through the rooms like a sleepwalker, the weight of Daniel's secret pressing on her shoulders, making each breath a conscious effort. The confrontation with her daughter had left her devastated. Emily, in her adolescent idealized pain, had cast her as the villain, the desecrator of her father's sacred memory. And Sarah, to protect her, accepted the role in silence, a martyr on an altar she hadn't chosen. The anger, dormant beneath the layer of shock, began to awaken. Anger at Daniel. Anger at his cowardice, his meticulously planned betrayal. He hadn't just deceived her, he'd cornered her, leaving her as the guardian of a truth that could annihilate her daughter. He died and escaped the burden, leaving the bomb for her to defuse or to let explode in her hands. The USB drive was a constant presence, even when tucked away in the bottom of her underwear drawer. It was a totem of her unraveled life. Sometimes in the middle of the night, she'd take it out and plug it into the laptop, revisiting the evidence of her humiliation. The need to see, to make it real beyond the computer screen, grew inside her like a fever. It was a compulsion, a terrible and irresistible idea. What did she hope to find? A confrontation? An explosion of pain? She didn't know. She only knew she couldn't keep living with those digital ghosts. She needed to give them flesh and bone, even if it destroyed her. On a Thursday morning, a week after Emily left, Sarah made a decision. She dressed in the most nondescript clothes she could find, jeans, a plain blouse, and comfortable sneakers. She grabbed her keys, her purse, and after a moment's hesitation, the crumpled lease agreement. The address was burned into her mind. Driving to Beaverton was like crossing a threshold. The tree-lined streets and sleek condos of her neighborhood gave way to a tangle of busy commercial avenues, overpasses, and a more functional, denser architecture. The GPS guided her through streets that grew progressively narrower and more modest. She felt like an intruder, a tourist in her own city. Each street sign, each unfamiliar face at a bus stop, heightened the sense of unreality. Daniel had been here, regularly, for years. He knew this path, these streets. It was a map of his secret life. Finally, the GPS announced, "You have arrived at your destination." It was a quiet residential street with simple houses and small 2- or 3-story apartment buildings. The building at the address was one of them, a modest structure, its beige paint slightly faded, with iron bars on the ground floor windows. There was no doorman, just an intercom by the metal gate. Sarah parked across the street, a few houses down, under the shade of a maple tree. She turned off the engine and sat there, her heart beating unevenly. What was she doing? This was madness. She should leave, go back to her house, to her familiar pain. But her eyes were fixed on the building, magnetized. She waited. She didn't know exactly for what. Maybe part of her still hoped it was all a colossal mistake, a misunderstanding. The midday sun warmed the car's interior. Time dragged. 15 minutes, 20, half an hour. She was about to give up, to admit the insanity of this expedition, when the building's gate creaked open. A woman stepped out. Sarah held her breath. It was her, the woman from the photos. Rachel. In person, she looked more tired than in the images, with faint circles under her eyes, but the same shy smile appeared as she turned to speak to someone still coming out. And then she appeared. The girl. Sophie. She was older than in the latest photos on the USB drive, maybe 9 now. She wore a blue and white school uniform and carried a pink backpack. She was talking animatedly to her mother, gesturing with her hands. And then she laughed, a bright, childish laugh. And in that moment, Sarah's world tilted on its axis. It wasn't just the resemblance that struck her, though it was undeniable. It was the entirety of the child, the way her head tilted when she listened, the way her shoulders moved when she laughed. They were Daniel's mannerisms. They were Emily's mannerisms. It was like seeing an echo, a reflection of her own daughter, her own husband, in a stranger across the street. The living, breathing proof of his lie. Sarah felt the air forced from her lungs. The scene was so domestic, so normal. A mother taking her daughter, probably to school. They walked down the sidewalk, the girl skipping ahead, and turned the corner, disappearing from view, and Sarah was left behind, alone in the car, utterly shattered. Seeing that happy child, that crushing resemblance, made it all irrevocably real. It was no longer a digital secret, a collection of files. It was a girl with a pink backpack and a laugh that echoed her daughter's, a life that existed, that breathed, that continued, indifferent to her pain. She didn't know how long she sat there, paralyzed. The drive home was a blur. She drove on autopilot, her mind a whirlwind of images. Rachel's smile, Sophie's backpack, Daniel's eyes in that girl's face. Back home, the solitude enveloped her like a shroud. The anger had dissipated, replaced by a deep, hollow pain, a sense of loss beyond Daniel's death. It was the loss of her own history, the sanctity of her memories. She needed a tether to the past, a tether to the truth, or what she thought was the truth. That's when she remembered the chest. An old wooden hope chest they'd bought at an antique store in Astoria early in their marriage. It was where they kept their most precious memories, their first photo together, their wedding invitations, Emily's tiny knit booties, letters exchanged in their early dating years. It was the time capsule of their love. With a heavy heart, she dragged it from the back of the closet. The wood creaked as she lifted the heavy lid. The scent of cedar and old paper filled the air. There were the relics of their life together. She sifted through them carefully, her fingers brushing faded photos, crumpled notes. They were witnesses to a happiness that now felt like a fraud. Every smile, every declaration of love, a lie. She was about to close the chest, her heart heavier than ever, when she noticed something out of place. Tucked beneath a photo album was an envelope, a plain white envelope sealed with her name, Sarah, written on the front in Daniel's unmistakable handwriting. There was no date, no return address. But she knew with a chilling certainty it wasn't an old letter. The ink was fresh, the paper pristine. It had been left there for her to find, deliberately. Her hands shook so much she nearly tore the envelope opening it. The letter ended. Sarah sat on the floor beside the open chest, the relics of her marriage scattered around her like the wreckage of a ship. The paper in her hands felt fragile, but carried the weight of a decade of lies. Daniel's handwriting, usually so firm and decisive, was different here. There was a hesitation in the strokes, a slight tremor that betrayed the facade of control he always strove to maintain. It was the writing of a haunted man. She paused, her chest tight. Anger and pain vied for space within her. He knew her well. He knew she wouldn't rest, that her intelligence and intuition would drive her to dig until she found the root of the rot. The letter didn't bring peace, but it shifted her perspective. The blind rage gave way to a clearer, deeper pain. She wasn't just the betrayed wife. She was the inheritor of a complex problem with 2 children at its center. The question haunting her now wasn't, why did he do this? But, what do I do now? The answer, she knew, wasn't in that room or that house. It was across town, in a modest apartment, where a woman with a shy smile and a girl with Daniel's eyes lived a life that, until now, had been invisible. In the days following the confession, a new feeling began to crystallize amid her pain. A cold, inevitable resolve. She needed to meet Rachel. Not out of morbid curiosity or a desire for revenge. She needed to look her in the eyes to understand the other half of the story, to give a face and voice to the woman who, until now, was just a silent figure at the center of the earthquake that had shaken her life. The decision to go back wasn't impulsive like the first time. It was calculated. She spent 2 days in a strange state of calm, preparing herself mentally for the meeting. What would she say? How do you start a conversation that's inherently impossible? Hi, I'm the wife of the man you had a daughter with. The absurdity was overwhelming. On the 3rd day, she woke knowing it was time. She tucked Daniel's letter into her purse. It was her only credential, her passport to that unknown world. It was also a shield, proof she wasn't there to attack, but to understand. The drive to Beaverton felt shorter this time, the familiarity of the route bringing a nervous calm. She parked on the same street, but instead of staying in the car, got out. She walked slowly to the beige building, her heart hammering an irregular rhythm against her ribs. She looked at the intercom, but didn't know which apartment was theirs. She'd have to wait. Luck or fate was on her side. About 10 minutes later, an elderly woman exited the gate, leaving it slightly ajar for a moment. It was enough. Sarah took a deep breath, pushed the gate open, and stepped into the small corridor leading to the stairs. The air was stuffy, with a faint smell of home-cooked food. There were 6 apartments, 2 per floor. She had no idea which to look for. Then she heard it. A cough. A dry, persistent cough coming from the second floor. The cough of a child. Chronic asthma. Daniel's words echoed in her mind. She climbed the stairs, her feet moving with an autonomy her conscious mind didn't possess. The door to apartment 201 was slightly ajar, perhaps for ventilation. The cough came from there. Gathering a courage she didn't know she had, she knocked lightly on the door. The hollow sound of her knuckles echoed. The voices inside stopped. Footsteps approached, and the door opened fully. Rachel stood there. Though they'd never met in person, the image of Sarah, the official wife, likely haunted her thoughts as much as Rachel's haunted Sarah's. "Yes," Rachel said, her voice slightly hoarse, defensive. Sarah opened her mouth, but no sound came out. All the rehearsed lines vanished. Instead, she simply extended her hand and offered the envelope. Her eyes pleaded for the other woman to understand. Rachel looked from the envelope to Sarah's face, and recognition dawned in her eyes. She took the envelope with a trembling hand, recognizing the handwriting instantly. Without a word, she opened the door wider, a silent invitation for Sarah to enter. The apartment was small, but impeccably clean and tidy. The living room doubled as a kitchen, and the furniture was simple and functional. On a couch sat Sophie, holding a bear-shaped inhaler. The girl looked at Sarah with her big, curious eyes, Daniel's eyes, then turned to her mother for reassurance. "Sophie, go to your room for a bit, sweetie. Mommy needs to talk to this lady," Rachel said, her voice soft but firm. The girl obeyed without question, disappearing down a hallway. The 2 women were left alone in the quiet of the small living room. Rachel didn't open the letter. She held it against her chest as if she knew its contents. "I'm so sorry," Rachel said, the words a whisper. I swear I never wanted you to go through this." Sarah just nodded, unable to speak. "He told me he'd left a letter for you," Rachel continued, her eyes welling up. "He was worried about what would happen. With me, with Sophie, but mostly with you and your daughter. He told me about her asthma," Sarah said, her voice finally emerging, faint. A sob escaped Rachel. "It's chronic. It gets worse with dry weather, with stress. He always helped. Paid for the best medicine, the health insurance. I don't know how I'll manage now." The vulnerability in her voice was palpable, disarming. There was no malice there, only fear and exhaustion. "He was a good father to her," Sarah stated, the words coming out with painful objectivity. It wasn't a question, it was a fact. "He was," Rachel confirmed, wiping a tear with the back of her hand. "He came once a week, always at the same time, helped Sophie with her homework, told her stories. She adored him. He was Uncle Daniel, our guardian angel. She doesn't know he's her father. He thought it was better that way, to protect her." The revelation hit Sarah with unexpected weight. Uncle Daniel. Another layer of the lie, another protection he'd built. He'd denied his daughter even the right to call him Dad. "I never wanted to disrupt your family," Rachel repeated like a mantra. "When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I wasn't going to tell him, but I had no one. He was the only person who helped me escape a terrible situation. I felt indebted, and what happened, it was a mistake I've paid for every day. He made it clear from the start that he loved you, that he'd never leave his family. I accepted my place. I just wanted my daughter to have a chance, to not go through what my other son did." She finally opened the letter, her eyes scanning the lines Sarah already knew by heart. Tears now streamed freely down her face. The two women, bound by the same handwriting, the same man, cried in silence. They sat in silence for a long time. It wasn't an awkward silence, but one of processing, of shared grief. Sarah looked around the apartment. She saw children's drawings pinned to the fridge with magnets, a toy telescope by the window, stacks of children's books on a small table. It was a home built on a lie, but a home full of love. "What happens now?" Rachel asked, her voice fragile, pulling them back to reality. Sarah didn't have an answer. But as she looked at this woman, at her dignity amid desperation, at the genuine concern in her eyes, the anger she felt began to morph into something more complex. Empathy. It wasn't forgiveness, far from it, but it was recognition that Rachel, too, was a victim of Daniel's choices. "I don't know," Sarah answered honestly. "I need time. My daughter, she doesn't know anything. She's hurting so much from losing her father." "Emily," Rachel said softly. "He talked about her a lot. Showed me pictures, he was so proud." Knowing Daniel shared Emily's life with his other family was a fresh stab of pain, but Sarah absorbed it. In that moment, the small pains didn't matter against the enormity of the problem they faced. There was a child in the other room, a girl who was her daughter's sister, a girl who'd just lost her uncle and her provider. Sarah stood. The meeting had reached its natural end. There was nothing more to say that day. "I have to go," she said. Rachel stood too. "Thank you for coming." As Sarah reached the door, she turned. "Don't worry about her medicine or school. For now, we'll figure it out." Rachel looked at her, her eyes filled with a gratitude so deep it was almost painful to see. She just nodded, unable to speak. Sarah descended the stairs and stepped into the sunlight, feeling utterly drained, as if she'd run a marathon. The drive home after meeting Rachel was a dive into a different kind of silence. Sarah felt like a battlefield after a truce, where the dust hadn't yet settled, but the main fight had ceased. The impulsive promise to figure it out echoed in her mind, a commitment she didn't know how to honor, but that somehow propelled her forward. The following days were spent in internal reckoning. She revisited Daniel's letter, not with the initial fury, but with a more compassionate, though still painful, lens. Emily's absence weighed heavily. The house felt too empty, too cold. Sarah missed her daughter's noisy presence, her teenage complaints, even her scowl. The pain of their separation, coupled with the guilt of not sharing the truth, was a heavy burden. She knew she needed to reconnect with Emily, but how? How to explain life's complexity without revealing the truth that would protect her but also destroy her? A call from her mother-in-law, Margaret, came as both relief and a new challenge. "Sarah, Emily misses home. She's calmer now. I think it'd be good if you came to get her." Sarah's heart leapt. It was the chance she'd been waiting for. "Of course, Margaret. I'm on my way." The drive to Margaret's was filled with mental rehearsal. What would she say? How would she address the rift between them? She settled on honesty, but a partial honesty, without revealing the secret. When she arrived, Emily was sitting on the porch, a book in her hands, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She looked smaller, more fragile than Sarah remembered. Her face still bore traces of resentment, but there was also a deep sadness. "Hi, honey," Sarah said softly. Emily looked up, and for a moment the barrier between them seemed insurmountable. "Hi, Mom. Your grandma said you were missing home." Emily shrugged. "Yeah, a little." Sarah sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "I missed you too, Emily. The house feels empty without you." Silence settled in. Sarah took a deep breath. "I know you're mad at me, and I get it. I understand you feel like I was disrespecting your dad's memory, but that's not what it was, honey. Never." Emily didn't respond, but her eyes, previously fixed on the horizon, were now on Sarah, curious. "Organizing his things when it's so hard," Sarah continued, her voice breaking. "Every item, every paper is a memory, and it hurts. But it's something that has to be done, and I was trying to do it the best I could. I didn't want to erase your dad, Emily. I just wanted to understand what he left behind, and to deal with it." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Your dad was a complex man, Emily. Like all of us, He had many layers, and he loved you more than anything. He loved me. But he was human too, and humans make mistakes, big mistakes sometimes. Emily frowned. What kind of mistakes? Mistakes that hurt the people we love, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. Mistakes he carried alone, and that in some way he tried to fix, even if in the worst way. He wasn't perfect, Emily, no one is, but he tried. He tried to be a good dad to you, a good husband to me, and he did the best he could with the tools he had. Emily looked at her, her eyes welling up. I just wish he was here. I know, sweetheart, so do I, Sarah said, reaching out and touching her daughter's arm. Emily didn't pull away. It was a small gesture, but significant. But he's not. And now it's just us. And we need to be strong for each other. We need to understand that people are more than what we see on the surface. That love is complicated. And that forgiveness is a long road, but necessary. Emily leaned in and rested her head on her mother's shoulder. I'm sorry, Mom, for what I said. I'm sorry too, honey. For everything, Sarah said, hugging her tightly. The embrace was awkward at first, but Emily soon returned it and they cried together, a cry of relief, reconciliation, and shared pain finding a new path. The drive home was lighter. Emily didn't know the full extent of her father's mistakes, but her mother had validated the idea that he wasn't perfect, that there were complexities to his life. That, in itself, was a crucial step. 2 days after Emily's return, Sarah made a decision. There would never be a perfect moment. Perfection was an illusion from her old life. Now there was only the necessary. She found Emily in the living room, sprawled on the couch, scrolling aimlessly on her phone, an image of normalcy that clashed violently with the storm about to form. Emily, honey, can we talk? Sarah asked, her voice steadier than she felt. She turned off the TV, eliminating distractions. Emily sat up, sensing the gravity in her mother's tone. What's wrong? Yes. There's something. Sarah sat across from her, hands clasped in her lap to hide their trembling. Remember when I said your dad was complex and made mistakes? Emily nodded, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. Well, I wasn't completely honest about what those mistakes were. I didn't tell you everything because I didn't know how, and because I was afraid of hurting you more. Sarah took a deep breath. When I was organizing the office, I found something your dad hid. An entire life he kept from us. Emily's face hardened. Mom, what are you talking about? What life? The words came out direct, no sugarcoating. It was the only way. Your dad had another family, Emily. He had a relationship with a woman named Rachel, and they had a daughter. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, as if all the air had been sucked from the room. Emily blinked once, twice, as if trying to process a foreign language. A nervous, incredulous smile flickered on her lips. That's a joke, right? What a horrible prank, Mom. Dad wouldn't do that. It's not a joke, sweetheart, Sarah said, her voice breaking. The girl's name is Sophie. She's 9 years old. The denial on Emily's face crumbled, giving way to an expression of horror and betrayal. Her eyes filled with tears. No, you're lying. You're making this up to ruin him because you were mad. I would never do that, Emily, Sarah said, her heart breaking at her daughter's pain. I saw it, honey. I have proof. Photos, emails. I went to their house. I saw her. The girl, she looks like him. She looks like you. The last sentence hit Emily like a physical blow. She curled in on herself, shaking her head frantically. Stop saying that. I don't want to hear it. My dad wasn't a liar. He loved us. He did love us, Emily. He loved us so much. But he messed up. He made a terrible mistake and didn't have the courage to tell us. No! Emily screamed, leaping to her feet. Tears streamed down her face. I don't believe you. I hate you for saying this. I hate you. With a sob that tore at her chest, she ran to her room and slammed the door with a force that made a picture frame in the hallway wobble. The sound of the lock clicking was like a gunshot in the quiet house. Sarah sat frozen, her body trembling, the pain of Emily's reaction echoing her own initial pain. She knew it would be hard, but she wasn't prepared for the hatred, the accusation. She gave her daughter the space she needed. Hours passed and she listened to the muffled sobs from behind the door. Each sound was a knife in her heart. When night fell and the sobs faded, replaced by a worrying silence, Sarah stood. She went to her room and retrieved the envelope Daniel had left in the chest. It was the only thing that might perhaps begin to heal the wound she'd just opened. She walked to Emily's door and knocked softly. "Honey, it's me." No response. "Emily, I know you're hurt and angry, and you have every right to be," Sarah said, her voice low, pressed against the wood of the door. "But there's something you need to see, something your dad left. For me. But really, it's for both of us." She waited. She heard movement inside. The lock turned slowly. The door opened just a crack. Emily's face was swollen, her eyes red. The anger had given way to a deep, desolate exhaustion. Sarah said nothing. She just handed over the envelope. Emily hesitated, then took it, her fingers brushing her mother's. She closed the door again without a word. Sarah returned to the living room and waited. Time crawled. She imagined her daughter reading the same words that had destroyed and, paradoxically, freed her. Nearly an hour later, Emily's door opened again. She emerged, the letter crumpled in her hand, her face wet with fresh tears. But these were different. Not tears of anger, but of a profound, understanding sadness. She approached and sat beside Sarah on the couch, curling up like a child. He really did it," she whispered, her voice broken. "He had another daughter." "Yes, sweetheart, he did," Sarah said, pulling her into a hug. This time, Emily nestled into her arms, seeking comfort. "I don't understand, Mom. How could he?" "I don't understand it all either, honey, but the letter helps see the complexity, his fear. It doesn't justify it, but it explains a little." They stayed wrapped in each other's arms for a long time, mother and daughter united in the same pain, the same grief for a man they now truly knew. When Emily calmed a bit, Sarah looked into her eyes. "Honey, there's one more thing. Now that you know, we can't just pretend they don't exist." Emily wiped her face. "What do you mean?" "I promised Rachel we'd figure it out. For the girl's medicine, her school, and I will. But it's not just about money. There's a 9-year-old girl who's your sister, and she's not to blame for any of this." Emily fell silent, processing. "I know it's hard. I know it feels impossible now," Sarah continued, her voice calm and resolute. "But we need to take the first step. I'm going to invite them, Rachel and Sophie, for dinner here in a few days." Emily's eyes widened, a mix of panic and surprise. "Here? In our house?" "Yes, here. It's the only way to start turning this awful story into something different. I don't know what it'll lead to. Maybe it'll be a disaster. But we can't live with this ghost forever. We need to face it." Emily didn't respond. The dinner was set, and with it, the beginning of the rest of their lives. The week leading up to the dinner was one of the longest in Sarah and Emily's lives. The house, now aware of the secret it held, seemed to hold its breath. Emily oscillated between long silences and bursts of questions, trying to piece together the puzzle of a father she now saw as a stranger. Sarah answered with a patience she didn't know she had, anchoring her daughter's pain in her own, forging a bond of complicity born from tragedy. The invitation was made over the phone, a brief and tense conversation between Sarah and Rachel, where more was said in the silences than in the words. It was settled. Saturday, 8 o'clock. When the doorbell rang right on time, an electric silence fell over the living room. Sarah and Emily exchanged a look, a silent pact of courage. Sarah opened the door. Rachel stood there, gripping Sophie's hand tightly. The girl, in turn, hid slightly behind her mother. Her big, curious eyes, Daniel's eyes, scanning the house's interior with a mix of shyness and awe. "Good evening. Come in, please," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. The air in the living room was thick, heavy with everything left unsaid. Emily stayed rooted near the couch, arms crossed, a wall of self-protection. Rachel, equally uneasy, murmured a "good evening" and nudged Sophie inside. The girl, in a simple dress and sparkly sneakers, looked tiny in the spacious room. The dinner was a masterpiece of forced politeness. Sarah served the lasagna she'd made, and the clink of silverware against plates was the only sound breaking the tension. Questions were safe, impersonal. "Where do you go to school, Sophie?" Sarah asked. "At Crestview Elementary," the girl replied, her voice soft. Emily stayed silent, pushing her food around her plate. It was Sophie who unwittingly broke the ice. Looking at a shelf in the living room, she pointed to an object. "Is that a real telescope?" Emily, who'd received the telescope from her father for her last birthday, looked up for the first time. "Yeah, a 90mm refractor." "Wow," Sophie whispered, her eyes sparkling. "I have a toy one. I love looking at the stars. My science teacher said Jupiter's visible this month." "I saw it last night," Emily said, her voice still guarded but with a hint of interest. "You can see the Galilean moons, Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto." Sophie's eyes widened. "Really? Uncle Daniel gave me a book about them." The mention of the nickname froze the air for a moment. Sarah saw pain flash across Emily's face, but her daughter took a deep breath, an unexpected maturity surfacing. "He gave me this telescope," Emily said softly. "Come on, I'll show you how it works." As the two girls moved toward the patio, Sarah and Rachel were left alone at the table watching the scene. A fragile, tentative thread of connection had formed, and with it, the tension in the room eased. "She's a lovely girl," Sarah said sincerely. "Emily is too," Rachel replied. "Daniel was so proud of her. Her intelligence, her strength." That night something shifted. There was no grand moment of catharsis or forgiveness. There was only the sight of two girls, two sisters, bent over a telescope, sharing a wonder for the stars, united by a complex legacy of pain and love. That dinner wasn't a one-off, but the first step in a long journey of rebuilding. The visits, initially cautious, became more frequent. Rachel and Sophie came over on Sundays. While the adults talked in the kitchen, building a relationship of mutual respect and empathy, the girls retreated to Emily's room, surrounded by books and school projects. The culmination of this new connection came 2 months later at Emily's school science fair. Their joint project, built together, was a detailed model of the solar system with LED lights for stars and small motors for planetary rotation. In the audience, Sarah and Rachel sat side by side. They weren't friends, perhaps never would be. They were two women marked by the same story, learning to navigate a new kind of family. A family born of mistake, of lies, of pain, but one that, slowly, was being sustained by truth, resilience, and an affection that sprouted in the most unexpected places. There was no immediate forgiveness for Daniel, no forgetting of the betrayal. The pain lingered, a scar that would always remind Sarah of the fracture in her life. But around her, new bonds were forming. There was room for healing. There was the laughter of two sisters discovering a universe, both in the sky and between themselves. And there was, finally, the possibility of a future no one would have chosen, but one they were learning to build together with courage and empathy. Their story was no longer about the secret that divided them, but about the truth that, in a tortuous and imperfect way, was beginning to unite them. If you were moved by the journey of Sarah, Emily, Rachel, and Sophie, and believe in the power of empathy to rebuild lives, leave a like to share this message with others, and to not miss any of our upcoming stories that touch the heart and make us reflect. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for listening, and until next time.